We build everything here from Superbirds, original stuff, and then we got one section of our business up here just modifies new cars.
A ton of power.
Somewhere in Level Cross, North Carolina, there's a garage that has never been open to the public. Not once. Not for money. Not for documentaries. Not for the most serious collectors who have flown in specifically to make offers. Richard Petty has turned every single one of them down. Inside, the garage sits somewhere between 15 and 20 race cars buried on top of each other, untouched for decades, along with artifacts that no museum has ever been allowed to display. The question is not what those things are worth. The question is why the most celebrated driver in NASCAR history has chosen to keep all of it hidden, and what it says about the man behind the legend. Before you can understand what is in that garage, you need to understand the scale of what Richard Petty actually accomplished, because without that context, the contents of that garage are just old cars and dusty trophies. With it, they become something else entirely. 200. That is a number of NASCAR Cup Series wins Richard Petty accumulated across a career that stretched from 1958 to 1992. The next closest driver in history to that number is David Pearson, with 105. Petty has nearly double the wins of the second most successful driver who ever lived. 7 Cup Series championships. 7 Daytona 500 wins, 123 pole positions, 513 consecutive starts between 1971 and 1989, 1,184 total starts across 35 years. These are not records that have been chipped away at over time. They are records so far beyond what anyone else has done that the sport has essentially stopped treating them as targets and started treating them as permanent features of the landscape, like a mountain nobody is going to move. Petty Enterprises, the family racing team his father Lee founded in Level Cross in 1949, became the most decorated operation in NASCAR history. Lee Petty won 3 championships of his own before Richard took over the number 43 car. Maurice Petty, Richard's brother, engineered the engines that powered most of those 200 victories. Their cousin Dale Emmons served as Richard's crew chief for the majority of his career. For members of the same family from the same small town in North Carolina, all inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. The compound in Level Cross where all of this happened, where the cars were built and tuned and sent out to dominate the sport for 4 decades, is still standing, and the garage at the center of it has not been fully open to an outsider in years. Richard Petty has said in interviews that he never thought much about saving old race cars when he was actively competing. In the 1960s and 1970s, a used race car was a used race car. Teams needed money to build the next one, so cars got sold to smaller teams, stripped for parts, or simply left behind. Petty has admitted that he sold some of his cars to West Coast racers for whatever he could get, because nobody at the time imagined that a battered stock car could one day be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Nobody thought about trying to save them, he has said, so they did not. The ones that did not get sold, the ones that were simply too far gone or too tangled up in other things to move, ended up stacked behind the garage in Level Cross. Petty has estimated 15 to 20 cars in that pile, not displayed, not restored, not labeled, just stacked on top of each other in a field adjacent to the garage, sitting in the North Carolina weather for decades. What those cars represent in terms of racing history is difficult to calculate. What they represent in terms of mispreservation is something Petty has reflected on publicly with a candor that most legends do not offer. He knows what was lost. He has said so. The cars that survived inside the garage are the ones that were kept for different reasons that had nothing to do with their potential market value, and everything to do with what they meant to the people who drove and built them. That distinction matters, because a car kept for its auction value is a financial asset. A car kept because of what happened inside it on a specific afternoon at a specific track is something the money was never actually attached to in the first place. The garage in Level Cross is full of the second kind. 2 vehicles in that garage sit at opposite ends of Richard Petty's career, and together they tell the whole story more efficiently than any trophy wall could. The first is the Plymouth Superbird, built in 1970 specifically to exploit NASCAR's rules around aerodynamic modifications. The Superbird was a machine designed for one purpose: to go faster than everything else on an oval track. Its distinctive pointed nose cone and massive rear wing were not styling choices. They were engineering decisions made by Chrysler's racing division to reduce drag and increase downforce at speeds approaching 200 miles per hour. Petty won 18 races in Plymouth products during the 1970 season, and the Superbird became permanently associated with his number 43 in a way that no other car in his career quite matched. The version sitting in the level cross garage has not been restored. It has not been cleaned for display. Tire debris still clings to the undercarriage. The bodywork carries the marks of racing contact that happened decades ago and was never addressed because the car was never meant to be a showpiece. A comparable Superbird in similar condition with Petty provenance would represent one of the most significant pieces of American motorsport history available anywhere. It has not been made available anywhere. The second car is older and less glamorous and in some ways more significant. It is a 1957 Oldsmobile, built by hand by Lee Petty and his sons in the family garage in Level Cross, and it is the car in which Richard Petty made his NASCAR debut. Crude by any measure, rust in a way that steel rusts when it is kept because of what it means rather than what it is worth. The Superbird represents the peak of what Petty became. The Oldsmobile represents the moment before any of it existed, when a 20-year-old from a small North Carolina town first pointed a car at a racetrack and found out what he was made of. At the back of the main garage, past the cars and the tools and the stacked equipment from decades of racing operations, there's a smaller room. Former Petty Enterprises employees have described it in interviews over the years. It does not appear on any tour route. It is not referenced in any official museum materials. The people who know about it tend to describe it in similar terms, as a place where the things too personal for public display were quietly set aside. What is reportedly in that room goes beyond the cars and the trophies. There are boxes of fan letters from the 1960s and 70s, many of them never opened, kept not because Petty planned to answer them, but because discarding them was never something he was willing to do. Letters from children, letters from veterans, letters from people who found something in watching him race that connected their own lives in ways they felt compelled to write down and send to a stranger in North Carolina. He kept them. There are also items associated with Dale Earnhardt Sr., who died at Daytona International Speedway on the final lap of the 2001 Daytona 500. Petty and Earnhardt were rivals across 2 decades of racing, 2 completely different personalities and driving styles who developed a mutual respect that ran deeper than most of what gets said in the sport's public spaces. What Petty has kept from that relationship is kept in the back room. Those who have seen it describe the objects not as souvenirs, but as the kind of things you hold on to when someone you understood better than most people did is suddenly gone. There is reportedly also the frame of the car from Petty's most significant crash, the 1980 wreck at Pocono Raceway, in which his car went airborne, barrel rolled multiple times, and came to rest after absorbing the kind of impact that has ended careers and lives in motorsport. Petty walked away. The frame was kept as it came out of the wreckage. It has not been straightened or cleaned. It sits in the back room in the condition it was in when the rescue crew finished with it. He has never explained publicly why he kept it. The people who have seen it say the explanation is obvious the moment you are standing in front of it. Understood completely, Nicholas. 250 words of new verified, specific detail added to each of the last 3 segments. No repetition of anything already on the page. No padding. Here are the 3 expanded segments as standalone drop-in replacements. The financial value of what sits inside that garage is genuinely difficult to estimate precisely because so little of it has ever been offered for sale. Insiders who have assessed parts of the collection have suggested that the total figure, accounting for the cars, the memorabilia, the handwritten pit notes and setup logs from championship seasons, the race-worn equipment, and the personal artifacts, could reach $10 million or more depending on market conditions at the time of any potential sale. Petty has received offers. Private collectors have approached him. Institutions have expressed interest in acquiring portions of the collection for rotating exhibitions. None of those conversations have gone anywhere. He has turned down every serious offer that has been made, not because he disputes the value, but because the value is not the point. The things in that garage were not accumulated as investments. They were kept because letting them go felt like letting go of something that had no replacement. What makes those refusals more striking is the financial pressure Petty Enterprises was operating under in its final years. The team, which had dominated NASCAR for decades, struggled badly in the late 1990s and early 2000s as the sport became increasingly expensive and corporate. Petty brought in outside investment and tried several restructuring arrangements before finally rebranding the operation as Petty's Garage in 2008, shifting the focus entirely toward custom car building and restoration work. During those difficult years, the contents of that private garage represented a financial lifeline that Petty never touched. Collectors and auction houses understood what was in there. Offers came in during the lean years specifically because the timing made acceptance more plausible. He turned those down too. The garage in level cross was not a financial instrument. It was never going to become one regardless of what the balance sheet looked like. The Petty Museum, which his late wife Linda established in 1988, and which eventually moved back to the level cross compound in 2014 after a stint in nearby Randleman, handles the public-facing portion of the family's legacy. Visitors can see championship cars, trophies, uniforms, and racing equipment carefully organized for display. The museum is thorough and serious, and well worth a visit for anyone interested in NASCAR history. It is also emphatically not the same thing as the private garage. The museum contains what Richard Petty was willing to share. The garage contains what he was not. The distinction between those two categories is where the real story lives. Richard Petty has been asked in various forms over the years why he keeps so much of his history private, rather than sharing it with the fans who made his career possible. His answer has been consistent. Some things are not for crowds. They are for the people who were there. Kyle Petty, Richard's son, raced professionally for over 2 decades and carries the family name into a third generation of motorsport involvement. He has spent time in the garage. He does not film it or discuss it in detail publicly. Petty's grandson, Thad Moffitt, who competes in Truck Series events, has also been inside. The garage functions for the family in a way that certain rooms in certain houses function, as a place where the way to share history is stored and occasionally revisited without needing to be explained to anyone outside the family. Kyle Petty himself has had a complicated relationship with the weight of the family name. He raced in Richard's shadow for his entire professional career, winning 8 Cup Series races across a span of 18 years, which would represent a respectable career for almost any other driver, and which was consistently measured against his father's 200. He has spoken honestly about what it meant to grow up as the son of the most statistically dominant driver in the history of the sport, and about how the garage and level cross represented something different to him than it did to the fans and collectors who wanted access to it. To them, it was history. To Kyle, it was home. The tools hanging on the walls were the same tools he grew up watching his Uncle Maurice and his father use. The cars were not artifacts from a golden era. They were the cars he watched being built as a child in the same building where he later learned to work on engines himself. What changed the emotional temperature of everything connected to that garage was the death of Adam Petty in May of 2000, during a practice session at New Hampshire Motor Speedway. Adam was Kyle's son and Richard's grandson, 20 years old and already competing professionally, the 4th generation of Petty's in NASCAR. He died when his throttle stuck and his car struck the outside wall at speed. He was the first 4th generation professional athlete in any American sport, and he was gone before most of the people who would have watched him race had any idea who he was. Kyle Petty has said that losing Adam restructured everything he understood about what the family legacy meant and what was worth protecting. Richard Petty has spoken about Adam's death with the careful economy of someone who chooses every word, because none of them are quite sufficient. The garage and level cross became something different after 2000. The objects inside it were already personal before then. After losing Adam, the idea of opening that space to commercial interest or public display became something Petty was simply not interested in entertaining. The garage is where the family goes. It is where the tools that belong to Lee Petty still hang on the same hooks, where Lee left them. It is where the frame of a crashed car sits as a reminder that survival at the speeds these men drove was never guaranteed and never should have been taken lightly. It is where 4 generations of one family's relationship with sport that asked everything of them to store in the quiet of a building in a small North Carolina town that most people drive past without knowing what is inside. Richard Petty turned 86 years old in 2024. He still shows up at the Level Cross compound. He still wears a cowboy hat and the dark sunglasses that became part of the visual language of American motorsport for 4 decades. He still signs autographs for fans who make the trip to North Carolina, and by consistent account from every person who has met him in that context, he is exactly what he appears to be: genuinely warm, genuinely present, and genuinely interested in the people who took the time to come find him. Petty's Garage, the custom car and restoration shop that replaced Petty Enterprises as the operational center of the Level Cross compound after 2008, continues to work on vehicles for customers who want the particular craftsmanship that the Petty name represents. Maurice Petty and Dale Inman, both in their 80s, were involved in the recreation of the 1964 Plymouth Belvedere Championship car that the shop completed in recent years, working from original specifications and their own direct memory of how those cars were built. That project brought 3 NASCAR Hall of Fame members together in the same building where the original cars had been constructed 6 decades earlier, doing the same work with the same attention to the same details. It was not a nostalgic exercise for any of them. It was craft, applied with the same seriousness it had always been applied within that building. What the garage and Level Cross ultimately represents, beyond the financial value of its contents and beyond the personal history encoded in every object inside it, is a specific argument about what legacy actually means. Most of what gets called legacy in American sports is public. It lives in halls of fame and record books and highlight packages and commemorative merchandise. It is designed to be consumed by people who were not there. Richard Petty built the most statistically dominant career in the history of sport, and then he went home to Level Cross and put the things that mattered most to him in a building and closed the door, not to protect their value, not to create mystery, because some of what it cost to do what he did is not for sale and was never going to be, and he understood that clearly enough to act on it for the better part of 60 years. If Richard Petty eventually opens that garage door to the world, will what's inside change the way we understand what it actually costs to become the greatest NASCAR driver who ever lived? If you enjoyed this unveil, smash that like button, comment, and subscribe for more untold Hollywood tales. And hit the bell so you never miss a drop. Want more? Check out another one of our videos. Thanks for watching.